Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side of life. It will help us every day, it will brighten all the way. If you keep on the sunny side of life.
I want to talk to you about measuring faith. We measure all kinds of things, and we have all through time, like time. As early, way back, we were trying to measure time because we recognize the importance of this. Probably nothing changed society more than this type of measure. And then, of course, is this. We measure. Of course, I tend to just kind of grab a handful, and sometimes my recipes come out a little bit challenging. Let's just call them experiments. But the good old measuring cup lets you know where you're at. And then, of course, like working on this cabin, of course, it was a group job when they worked on this. There's the old measuring tape. Of course, you can't ever find one when you need it. But boy, when you need it, you really need it. But faith is also something we have to measure. The internal things about our lives are important to measure. Someone said something to this effect. Faith is living like what God promised, what God promises, and you can't see is already in place. You're living your life day by day. You're dealing with people like what God promises, what God can do. And you just can't quite see yet have already come to pass. Sometimes we just don't know what we have until we really have to use it. Like when you're cooking, you don't know how much, whether you got enough until you measure it. So you have to use it. Well, and I suppose that all that we're going through with the pandemic and with a lot of upheaval going on around us, I suppose that's what tests are. These can be tests for, but all through life, in this world, you got problems, like we talked about Sunday, and so many of you talked to me after the park service, and a beautiful day, and meeting out there in God's world. It was just amazing. It's a great experience. If we didn't even have this going on, it would be great. It's so enjoyable. But these things are tests for us. And when we talk about problems in this world, you're going to have problems, you're going to have tribulation. And I suppose that's what tests are for. They kind of show us things like this. Times like these are times where it shows us what we have, and sometimes maybe where we're lacking, where we come up short. Now, it could be knowledge. We just don't know enough, and there's an awful lot of that going around. I sure feel that at times. Sometimes you have a test in school or in a circumstance where you find out you really didn't know, or you find out you knew a lot more than you thought. Or it could be strength. You didn't know for sure if you could do it, but you did it. But there's also tests of faith, and we've talked about that the last couple of times. Trials, problems, unexpected changes, stresses in life, they test us. Someone one time, I used to say this until other people started quoting it back at me. Stress is not an excuse, it's a revelation. Stress is not an excuse, it's a revelation. It shows you what's going on. Trials, problems, changes that you didn't expect, new understanding, new information that you didn't know about. You never heard it. So many things in my life I never realized until later. I thought I had it figured out. These test our faith. They show us the proportion of our faith to your challenge to grow and my challenge to grow. So I want to talk about this question of how do we measure faith? The Bible talks about faith as something that can be measured. Romans 12:3 says, "For through the grace given to me, I say everyone among you is not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think." By the way, that is a central theme throughout the Bible, that of humility. When you see someone, it doesn't matter who it is, who doesn't communicate humility, there's a lack of grace in their life. They're really not a godly person. For through grace, the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has allotted each a measure of faith. God will give you that. God gives you faith, and you have to respond to it and experience God's grace. And we'll talk more about that. But there's a measure of faith. Paul tells us this idea, like I said, that humility is the foundation of a life of grace. God gives grace to the humble. He goes on to tell us that even how we function as we interact with our church family and our fellow believers, that connectiveness and that commitment, even in the midst of difficulty, as we function in our gifting as believers, is based on the amount of our faith. This is what he goes on to say in Romans 12:4. He says, "For just as we have many members in one body, and all the members do not have the same function," you're different than me, and I'm different than you. I have a different role. I'm not more important. I'm just have a different responsibility. Since we have, he says, "So we are many in one body in Christ and individually members of one another." So this is Romans 12:5. And then he says this amazing thing. "Since we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, each of us is to exercise them accordingly. If prophecy, according to the proportion of his faith." In other words, in me preaching, I have to do it according to the proportion of my faith, to do the right thing, even though sometimes it's hard and sometimes people don't like it, and sometimes people will just not listen to me, or they'll choose to go someplace else for somebody else to tell them what they want to hear. I have to do it according to the proportion of my faith. You are to grow, and so am I, as his disciple. You have to grow. You grow in faith. And you can't stop at the start. You don't just pray or take that next step and get baptized, which you should. But you don't just pray and then stop at the start. You got to keep growing. But what do you grow in? Like I said, you grow in faith. You have to grow as a disciple, and you grow in faith. This is what the Bible teaches us very clearly. And so this is what Romans chapter 1 says. It says, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed, get this, from faith to faith. As it is written, the righteous man shall not just have faith at one point or go forward at some point, but the righteous man, he lives by faith. And you know how you live? You live from faith to faith, from one thing that you got to trust God in another. You don't feel like it, you don't like it, it's inconvenient, but you got to do it because you're doing what God told you to do. You're loving the way God wanted you to love. We live by faith. We don't just have a little bit of faith or talk about our faith. We live by it because that's where grace comes from. And we grow. How? Like I said, from faith, one moment, one step of faith to the other. Oswald Chambers said his whole motto for life was trust God and then do the next thing. In other words, what he was saying was you trust God, what he showed you to do, and you do the next thing. And our faith grows a measure at a time. So what do you look for? Back to my original question. How do you measure faith? Well, this weekend's message is going to be on this question. And so it's going to be about how you pay attention. What do you look for in your measuring of faith? And what you are looking for and what you're going to learn about this week, and whether that's you watch it online, which it's still going to be online, or whether you come to the park and sit in your chair and wear your mask and be safe and do all that. No, I know that may be inconvenient for you, but some of you, lots and lots and lots of you have been doing it. It's so good to see you. And I can sit down in that special chair that Ken and Dorothy gave me, and that's my office right there in the tree. You know, you can come and you can see if your faith is greater than the obstacles to being like Jesus in your life and around you. That's what you have to pay attention to, the measure of faith. And I'm praying, I really am praying, whether you watch online or whether you watch under the trees, I'm praying that you will hear this message, that you'll really hear it, because that we will go forth as a people of faith. It's never been more important for you to stand out as a giant of faith. But giants of faith don't become giants in one step. You go from faith to faith. And this is your moment. This is your hour to shine and to grow and to stretch. And I know it's not comfortable. I know there's stuff going on this week, and some of you are worried about schools, and how's it going to happen, and what order is it going to happen, and it's really a stretch, and I know it's hard. I wish I could do something about it. I wish we as a community could do something about it, but we're not in charge of this. So there's no reason to get mad at anybody. But we do have a chance. We don't have to get mad. We have to come to a place of deeper faith, and we're going to measure that out, and you'll be able to see it. Can't wait to see you.